Hi, I'm Marcus. For 23 years, I was the family ghost, present but invisible, funding but forgotten, supporting but never celebrated. They cropped me out of photos like I was a stain on their perfect image. But last Christmas, when my sister announced I was too embarrassing for the family portrait, I handed her an envelope. When she opened it, the room went dead silent. But what was inside that envelope? That was just the moment everything changed forever. Would you have stayed quiet like I did all those years, watching them live off your money while treating you like dirt, or would you have burned their fake paradise to the ground? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never understood why money couldn't buy belonging. Growing up, I thought if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, stayed quiet enough, maybe they'd finally see me as family instead of a walking ATM with social anxiety. But standing in that decorated living room last December, watching my own blood relatives debate whether I was photogenic enough for their Christmas card, I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. Love isn't something you can purchase on a payment plan. The house smelled like cinnamon and expensive candles, the kind my stepmother Lisa bought in bulk from some boutique catalog that charged $40 for what you could get at Target for $5. Everything in the Henderson household had to be premium, curated, Instagram-worthy, including the family members who appeared in photos. My dad James sat in his leather recliner, the one I'd bought him for Father's Day 3 years running because he kept complaining about his back. He was scrolling through his phone, probably checking the stock portfolio I'd been quietly funding since he lost his job in 2019. My half-sister Emma bounced around the room in a red velvet dress that cost more than most people's car payments, courtesy of the credit card I'd been covering since she graduated college and couldn't find work that met her standards. Lisa stood near the mantelpiece, adjusting ornaments on the tree I'd paid to have professionally decorated. She wore the diamond necklace I'd given her last Christmas, the one she'd posted about on Facebook with the caption "blessed with such a generous family" without mentioning who actually bought it. Her smile was perfect, practiced, the kind photographers loved but never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. "Marcus, sweetie," she called out in that sugar-coated voice she used when she needed something. "The photographer will be here in 20 minutes. Maybe you should go freshen up upstairs while we get the good shots first." I looked down at my outfit: clean jeans, a button-down shirt I'd ironed myself, shoes I'd polished that morning. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive looking, but certainly nothing that screamed embarrassing. "I thought this was a family photo session," I said quietly. Emma laughed, that tinkling sound she made when she found something amusing but not quite funny enough to actually smile about. "Oh Marcus, you know what Lisa means. The Christmas card photos, the ones we send to actual important people." "I am family," I said, hating how defensive I sounded even to myself. James finally looked up from his phone. "Son, you know we love you, but these photos are for professional purposes. Lisa's book club, Emma's networking contacts, my business associates. We need to present a certain image, a certain image." I'd heard variations of this phrase my entire life. When they didn't invite me to Emma's graduation party because I might say something awkward to her sorority sisters. When they forgot to include me in the family vacation photos they posted online because I looked tired in most of them. When they seated me at the kids' table during Thanksgiving, even though I was 28 years old and paying for half the groceries. I was the family's dirty secret, the relative they acknowledged in private but edited out of their public narrative, the son who funded their lifestyle but didn't fit their aesthetic, the brother who covered their debts but couldn't be trusted around their friends. "What if I just stayed in the background?" I suggested, already knowing the answer but needing to hear them say it. Lisa's expression shifted slightly, the mask slipping just enough to show the irritation underneath. "Marcus, darling, you're being dramatic. This isn't personal. It's just that some people photograph better than others. You understand, right? Some people photograph better than others." Translation: you're too fat, too awkward, too obviously lower class despite having more money than the rest of us combined. You don't have Emma's model cheekbones or James's distinguished gray hair or Lisa's practiced social media smile. You look like what you are, a guy who works 60-hour weeks in IT consulting to afford the luxury lifestyle your family has grown accustomed to. The doorbell rang, saving me from having to respond. Lisa clapped her hands together like a kindergarten teacher calling for attention. "That's Kevin, everyone places." Kevin the photographer was exactly what I'd expected. Perfectly styled hair, expensive camera equipment, the kind of artificially enthusiastic personality that came with charging $300 an hour for pictures people would look at twice and then store in digital folders they'd never open again. "Henderson family," he exclaimed, setting up his equipment with practiced efficiency. "I'm so excited to work with you today. Lisa showed me your vision board, and I think we can create something truly special." Vision board. Of course there was a vision board, probably filled with pictures of families who looked like they belonged in furniture catalogs, all perfect teeth, and coordinated outfits, and strategically placed hands on shoulders. "Now where's everyone going to be positioned?" Kevin asked, looking around the room. "Well, we have the core family unit here," Lisa said, gesturing to herself, James and Emma. "And then Marcus." She paused, looking at me like I was a piece of furniture she couldn't quite figure out how to arrange. "I can just watch," I offered. "From the kitchen." "Don't be silly," Kevin said, though his smile seemed forced now that he'd gotten a better look at the family dynamics. "Everyone should be included. That's what family photos are about." Emma stepped forward, her voice carrying that authoritative tone she'd perfected during her brief stint as a marketing assistant before she decided the corporate world wasn't creative enough for her artistic soul. "Actually, Kevin, we were hoping to get some shots with just the three for the Christmas cards. Marcus tends to be a bit camera shy." Camera shy? That was a new one. I'd been called awkward, antisocial, boring, but never I wasn't afraid of cameras. I was afraid of the judgment that came after, the careful cropping and editing and digital erasure that happened once the photos were uploaded. Kevin looked confused. "But he's family, right? Most families want everyone included, especially for holiday cards." "He's my stepson," James said, as if that explained everything. Which in the Henderson family hierarchy, it probably did. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, exactly, but crack. Like ice forming on a windshield, spreading in thin lines that would eventually spider across the entire. Hans had adopted me legally when I was 12. I'd been calling him Dad for 16 years. I'd put him on my emergency contacts, my insurance beneficiaries, my mortgage application as next of kin. But when it mattered, when someone outside the family was listening, I was his stepson. "Right," Kevin said slowly. "Well, we can certainly work around that. Maybe we start with some group shots, then move to smaller combinations." "Actually," Lisa interjected, "I think we'll skip the group shots today. Marcus, honey, why don't you go upstairs and let us handle the professional photos? You can come back down when we're doing candids later." Candids, the throwaway shots, the ones that didn't matter enough to print or frame, or show to people who mattered. I was good enough for candids. I looked at the three of them, standing in their carefully coordinated outfits in the living room I'd helped pay to redecorate, preparing to document their family unit for posterity while actively excluding the person who made their lifestyle possible. Emma in her designer dress, paid for with my money. James in his expensive watch, a gift from me last Father's Day. Lisa wearing the jewelry I'd bought her, standing in front of the fire had helped refinance when they couldn't make the mortgage payments. "You know what?" I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I think I will go upstairs. Take all the time you need." I climbed the stairs slowly, listening to the excited chatter resume below as soon as I was out of sight. Kevin's professional voice directing poses, Lisa's delighted laughter at some joke I couldn't hear, Emma's animated discussion about angles and lighting, the sounds of a family enjoying themselves, unencumbered by the presence of the person who funded their happiness. In my old bedroom, which had been converted into Lisa's craft room years ago, I sat on the edge of what used to be my bed, and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my banking app, looking at the numbers that had become so routine I barely registered them anymore. $5,000 to cover James's car payment when he was between jobs, $3,000 for Emma's rent when her art gallery internship didn't work out, $1,500 for Lisa's medical bills when her insurance wouldn't cover her elective procedures, $2,000 for this month's mortgage payment when James's consulting income fell short, $800 for Emma's credit card bill, $1,200 for Lisa's shopping sprees. The numbers went on, an endless stream of financial support that had become as automatic as breathing. I opened my Photos app and scrolled back through years of family gatherings, Thanksgiving dinners where I was cropped out of group shots, birthday parties, where I appeared only in background candids, Christmas mornings where I was the one behind the camera, never in front of it. Even in my own graduation photos, celebrating my master's degree in computer science, I was positioned at the edge of every shot, easy to edit out if needed. They'd been writing me out of their visual history for years, keeping my money but discarding my image. I was the ghost in their machine, present but invisible, essential but unwanted. Downstairs I could hear Kevin's camera clicking rapidly, capturing the perfect Henderson family Christmas. The family that existed only because of my financial support but looked better without my physical presence. I closed the photo app and opened my email instead. Time to review some contracts. Growing up as Marcus Henderson, I learned early that love came with conditions. Not the obvious kind that parents warn you about, like strangers offering candy or friends who only call when they need something. The subtle kind, the kind that wraps itself in family obligations and guilt disguised as affection. My real dad died when I was 8. Heart attack at 42, the kind of sudden tragedy that reshapes a family's entire future in the space of an ambulance ride. Mom did her best for a few years, working double shifts as a nurse to keep our small apartment, but the medical bills and the mortgage and the reality of raising a kid alone eventually wore her down. When she met James Henderson at a hospital fundraiser, it felt like rescue. He was established, stable, recently divorced with joint custody of a daughter just a year younger than me. He had a house in the suburbs, a steady income, and most importantly, he seemed to genuinely care about both me and Mom. The wedding was small but perfect. I was 10, proud to carry the rings, excited about having a dad again and a sister to share adventures with. James adopted me 2 years later, a legal process that felt like the final piece clicking into place. I had a family again, a real family, the kind other kids at school talked about.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
For a while it worked. James taught me to throw a football and helped with my math homework. Emma and I bonded over video games and shared custody horror stories from her weekends with her biological mom. Mom seemed happier than she'd been since Dad died, finally able to breathe without constantly worrying about money. But families, I learned, are like photographs. They can look perfect from a distance, but when you get close enough, you start to see the imperfections. The forced smiles, the careful positioning, the way certain people get pushed to the edges of the frame. It started small. James would take Emma to father-daughter events but never invited me to father-son activities. When people asked about his kids, he'd mention Emma first, then add in my stepson Marcus as an afterthought. During custody weekends, Emma got his undivided attention, while I was encouraged to find quiet activities that wouldn't interfere with their bonding time. Mom tried to balance things out, but she was walking her own tightrope, trying to be a good wife while protecting her son from feelings she pretended not to notice. She'd make special dinners on nights when James took Emma out alone, or buy me extra Christmas presents when Emma's biological mom sent elaborate gifts that made my stepfather's offerings look modest in comparison. The real shift happened when I turned 16. That was the year I got my first job, bagging groceries at the local supermarket after school. Nothing glamorous, but it felt good to have my own money, to contribute something to the household that had given me stability when I needed it most. James praised my work ethic, told his friends about his responsible stepson who was learning the value of hard work, but praise, I discovered, could be its own kind of prison. Once you become the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who can be counted on to handle problems quietly, it becomes increasingly difficult to be anything else. When Emma crashed James's car during her senior year, I was the one who worked extra hours to help cover the insurance deductible. When the family vacation to Florida came up short on funding, I contributed my entire summer's worth of grocery store wages. When Mom needed a new laptop for her nursing courses, I saved for 3 months to buy it. Each time, the gratitude was genuine but brief. The help was accepted as natural, expected, the kind of thing family members do for each other without keeping score. Except somehow, the score was always being kept, and I was always in the position of giving rather than receiving. College was supposed to change things. I'd earned a partial scholarship to the state university, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. James and Mom sat me down at the kitchen table with financial aid forms and explanations about family contribution requirements and the reality that they couldn't afford to help much with the remaining costs. "We believe in you," James said, his hand on my shoulder. "You're smart enough and driven enough to make this work. We just need you to understand that Emma's going to need our support too, and her school is more expensive." Emma was attending a private art college in another state, the kind of place where tuition costs more than most people's annual salaries. Her talent was undeniable, her passion infectious, and her need for financial support constant. James had already taken out a second mortgage to cover her first year, so I worked 3 part-time jobs during the semester, full-time construction work during summers, anything that would let me graduate without drowning the family in debt. I lived in the cheapest dorms, ate ramen more often than real food, and wore the same clothes until they fell apart. When I graduated with honors and a job offer from a prestigious tech consulting firm, the family celebration was enthusiastic but brief. Emma was struggling with her senior thesis, and most of the conversation focused on her stress levels and her concerns about finding work in the competitive art world. I moved into a studio apartment near my new job and started sending money home immediately, not because anyone asked directly, but because the hints were constant and the needs were real. James's consulting work was inconsistent. Mom's nursing salary was steady but not enough to cover the lifestyle they'd grown accustomed to. Emma's art career was taking time to develop, and she needed support while she figured things out. The money started small, a few hundred here and there for emergencies, temporary help during rough months, the kind of assistance any successful family member might provide. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when nobody wants to acknowledge what's really happening. Within 2 years, I was covering a significant portion of the family's monthly expenses. Within 5 years, I was essentially subsidizing their entire lifestyle. They'd grown accustomed to a standard of living that required my income to maintain, but they'd also grown accustomed to not acknowledging that dependence. The photography issue started around year 3 of my financial contributions. It was Emma's birthday party, and Lisa had hired her as professional photographer to capture the celebration. I was there, of course, having paid for the venue and most of the catering. But when the family photos were being arranged, I kept getting positioned at the edges, partially hidden behind other relatives, or suggested for the fun candid shots instead of the formal portraits. "Marcus, honey, you're so tall, you're blocking people," Lisa would say. Or, "Marcus, sweetie, you look tired, maybe sit this one out and we'll get some pictures of you later." Later never came, or when it did, the photos were afterthoughts. The kind of casual snapshots that never made it into frames, or albums, or social media posts. I existed in their photographic record the same way I existed in their financial life, essential but invisible, present but unacknowledged. The exclusion became more systematic over time. Family Christmas cards featured James, Lisa, and Emma in carefully coordinated outfits, looking like the perfect blended family they'd always aspired to be. I was the one behind the camera, or I was cropped out, or I was simply not invited to participate in the formal shoots. "You understand, don't you, Marcus?" Lisa would say when I occasionally raised the issue. "These photos are for certain audiences. James's business contacts, Emma's networking events, my social groups. We need to present the right image." The right image, apparently, didn't include me. Too awkward, too serious, too obviously middle class, despite having more disposable income than the rest of them combined. I didn't have Emma's natural charisma, or James's distinguished appearance, or Lisa's social polish. I looked like what I was, a guy who worked hard for his money and didn't spend much time or energy on presentation. But here's the thing about being excluded from family photos: it's not really about the photos themselves, it's about what the photos represent. They're evidence of belonging, proof of love, documentation that someone considers you worth preserving for posterity. When you're consistently edited out, cropped away, or simply not invited to participate, the message becomes clear. You're not the kind of family member people are proud to display. The worst part wasn't even the exclusion itself, it was the way they managed to make it feel reasonable, considerate, even kind. They weren't rejecting me, they were protecting me from the discomfort of being photographed. They weren't leaving me out, they were giving me space to be myself. They weren't embarrassed by me, they were simply aware that different occasions called for different presentations. But I paid for those occasions. I funded the vacations that generated the family photos I was excluded from. I covered the costs of the professional photography sessions that document with happiness without including the source of their financial stability. I made their picture-perfect life possible, while being systematically erased from the visual record of that life. By the time Lisa made her comment about me being too embarrassing for the Christmas card photos, I'd been financially supporting the Henderson family for almost 8 years. I'd covered mortgage payments, car repairs, medical bills, vacation costs, Emma's student loans, James's business expenses, and Lisa's shopping habits. I'd paid for family dinners I was too socially awkward to enjoy, family trips I was too busy working to attend, and family celebrations where I was encouraged to stay behind the camera. I'd bought them a lifestyle they couldn't afford, and then been told I didn't fit the image that lifestyle was supposed to project. Standing in that decorated living room, listening to them debate my photogenic qualities, while wearing clothes I'd paid for and planning events I'd funded, something finally crystallized in my mind. I wasn't their son, their brother, their family member. I was their patron, their sponsor, their silent financial backer, and patrons, apparently, were meant to remain behind the scenes. But every patron has the right to review their investments, and every sponsor has the power to withdraw their support. I'd spent years trying to buy my way into a family that had never intended to include me as an equal member. I'd funded their dreams while setting aside my own, covered their mistakes while being blamed for my successes, and supported their lifestyle while being treated as an embarrassment to their image. The envelope I handed Lisa that Christmas morning contained more than just financial records. It contained the documentation of exactly who had been paying for their picture-perfect life, and what would happen when that funding stopped. But before I could reveal what was in that envelope, I needed to understand how I'd gotten to that point. How a kid who just wanted to belong had become the invisible financier of a family that considered him too embarrassing to photograph. The path from grateful stepson to resentful ATM didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, like erosion, where each small compromise and accommodation carved away a little more of my dignity, until I barely recognized what remained. After graduating college and starting my consulting career, I was genuinely excited to help my family. Success felt hollow when the people you loved were struggling, and I had both the means and the desire to make their lives easier. The first few payments felt like privileges, opportunities to express gratitude for the home and stability James had provided during my teenage years. When James's consulting contracts dried up during the economic downturn, I stepped in without being asked. $5,000 a month to cover the mortgage and basic expenses, temporary assistance until his business recovered. Just until I get back on my feet, he promised, and I believed him. Family was supposed to support each other during hard times. When Emma struggled to find work after graduating from her expensive art school, I covered her rent and student loan payments while she interned at galleries and built her portfolio. Just until I get established in the art world, she said, and that seemed reasonable. Creative careers took time to develop, and I could afford to help her pursue her dreams. When Lisa needed medical procedures that insurance wouldn't cover, I paid without hesitation. When the family car needed major repairs, I handled it. When they wanted to take a vacation to celebrate their wedding anniversary, I made it possible. Each expense in isolation seemed justified, temporary, reasonable, but together they formed a pattern of dependence that nobody wanted to acknowledge. I was funding their lifestyle, but we all maintained the fiction that these were loans, gifts, temporary assistance between family members who cared about each other. The fiction became harder to maintain as the amounts increased and the requests became more frequent. James's business never fully recovered, but instead of downsizing or adjusting their lifestyle, the family simply expected me to cover the shortfall. Emma's art career remained aspirational, but instead of taking a more practical job to support herself, she continued pursuing unpaid internships and expensive workshops funded by my income. Lisa, who had worked part-time before marrying James, stopped working entirely once my contributions became reliable. Why stress about employment when Marcus could handle? But the money was only part of the problem. The deeper issue was the way my financial contributions changed my role in the family dynamic. I wasn't Marcus the son or Marcus the brother anymore. I was Marcus the provider, Marcus the responsible one, Marcus who could be counted on to handle problems quietly and efficiently. When Emma wanted to take an expensive trip to Europe to study art, the family meeting wasn't about whether it was a good idea or whether they could afford it. It was about how much Marcus could contribute and whether I thought the experience would be worth the investment. When James wanted to buy a new car, the discussion focused on which model would be most practical and whether Marcus would be comfortable making the monthly payments until his business picked up again. When Lisa wanted to redecorate the house, she presented mood boards and cost estimates to me like I was a client approving a project budget rather than a family member being asked for help. I'd become the family's financial solution, the person responsible for making their wishes possible. And like any employee or service provider, I was expected to be competent, reliable, and unobtrusive. I wasn't supposed to have opinions about how they spent the money I provided, needs that might conflict with their priorities, or feelings that might complicate the arrangement. The photograph situation was just the most visible manifestation of my changed status. Providers don't get featured in family portraits, they work behind the scenes, making everything possible while remaining invisible. Including me in their carefully curated family photos would have been like including the caterer or the decorator, technically essential, but not part of the story they wanted to tell about themselves. This became crystal clear during Emma's engagement party last spring. She'd been dating Derek, a struggling musician with expensive taste and no visible means of support, for about 6 months when they decided to get married. The engagement party was Lisa's idea, a chance to introduce Derek to the extended family and celebrate the young couple's future together. I paid for the veggies, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, and Emma's engagement dress. I also quietly covered the cost of Derek's suit when it became clear he couldn't afford anything appropriate for the occasion. The total came to nearly $8,000, but Emma was happy, and her happiness had always been presented as a family priority. The photographer spent the evening capturing beautiful moments of the happy couple, the proud parents, the supportive extended family. I watched from my usual position at the periphery, making sure everything ran smoothly, handling small crises, and staying available in case anyone needed anything. When it came time for the formal family photos, Lisa approached me with her practiced smile and lowered voice. "Marcus, sweetie, would you mind stepping out for a few minutes? We want to get some shots of just the immediate family with Emma and Derek." I looked around the room at the immediate family. James, Lisa, Emma and Derek, who'd been part of the family for 6 months compared to my 18 years as James's legal son. "I am immediate family," I said quietly. "Of course you are, honey," Lisa replied, her voice taking on that patient tone people use with difficult children. "But these photos are for Emma's wedding album, and she wants them to look timeless. You know how you feel about being photographed." I didn't feel any particular way about being photographed. I felt a particular way about being excluded from family photos while paying for the events being photographed, but that wasn't the same thing. Emma approached us, radiant in her engagement dress, holding Derek's hand. "Marcus, thank you so much for making this possible," she said, giving me a quick hug. "This party is perfect. Derek's family is so impressed." "I'm glad you're happy," I said. "I was hoping I could be in some of the family photos." Emma's smile flickered slightly. "Oh Marcus, you know how awkward you get around cameras. Plus these photos need to work for the wedding slideshow and Derek's family is very traditional. They're expecting a certain kind of presentation. A certain kind of presentation." The phrase that had haunted my entire adult relationship with this family. I wasn't the right kind of son for their presentation. I was the kind who paid for everything but didn't fit the image they wanted to project. "Maybe we could take a few with everyone," I suggested. Lisa jumped in smoothly. "Of course we will, sweetie. After we get the formal ones done. You know how these photographers work. They need to focus on the key shots first." The key shots happened. I watched from across the room as the Henderson family posed with Emma and Derek, looking like the perfect blended family celebrating their daughter's engagement. James with his distinguished gray hair and proud father smile. Lisa elegant in the dress I'd paid for, beaming with maternal joy. Emma luminous in her designer gown, the picture of a beloved daughter surrounded by family support. Derek fitting seamlessly into the group dynamic, already looking like he belonged. They looked happy, complete, successful. Everything a family photo should convey. The fact that none of it would have been possible without my financial support was invisible in the frame, just as I was invisible in their concept of family. The photographer moved on to other shots. Emma with her sorority sisters, Derek with his groomsmen, extended family groupings that shifted and changed as the evening progressed. The promised photos that included me never materialized. The photographer packed up his equipment. The party ended, and I went home alone to my apartment, which felt smaller and quieter than usual. The photos from Emma's engagement party were posted on social media within days. Beautiful professional shots that told the story of a loving family celebrating an important milestone. I appeared in exactly 3 photos, one where I was partially visible in the background helping the caterer set up, one where my hand was visible handing someone a drink, and one candid shot where I was checking my phone while everyone else laughed at something Derek had said. The comments were predictably enthusiastic. Such a beautiful family. Emma looks radiant. You can see how much love there is in this family. Each comment was a small knife, highlighting what everyone could see, a perfect loving family, and what nobody knew, that the person who made it all possible wasn't considered photogenic enough to include. That night I sat in my apartment with a calculator and spreadsheets, adding up exactly how much Emma's engagement party had cost me. $8,347. More than most people spent on their entire wedding, used to fund a party where I was too embarrassing to include in the permanent I started thinking about all the other events I'd funded but been excluded from documenting. Emma's college graduation, where I was cropped out of most family photos because I looked tired, after working overtime to pay for the celebration. James and Lisa's 10th wedding anniversary party, where I was positioned behind other people in group shots because my casual attire didn't match the formal dress code I hadn't been informed about. Family vacation photos from trips I'd paid for but was too busy working to attend. Years of financial support, hundreds of thousands of dollars in assistance, and my reward was systematic exclusion from the visual record of the family I'd helped create and maintain. But the engagement party photos were different somehow. Maybe it was seeing Derek, a virtual stranger, seamlessly integrated into family photos while I remained invisible despite 18 years of legal sonship and 8 years of financial support. Maybe it was the realization that I would probably be excluded from the wedding photos too, despite paying for the wedding. Maybe it was just the cumulative weight of all those small rejections finally reaching a breaking point. That night, I started a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it simply Documentation. Inside I began organizing financial records, payment confirmations, email exchanges, text messages, anything that showed the real story behind the Henderson family's picture-perfect life. I wasn't planning revenge exactly. I was planning accountability. For years, I'd allowed them to maintain the fiction that their lifestyle was sustainable, that my contributions were temporary, that their dependence on my income was just a phase they were going through until things got better. But things weren't getting better, they were getting more expensive. Emma's wedding was going to cost more than her engagement party. James's business showed no signs of recovering. Lisa's spending habits were increasing rather than decreasing, and my role as the family's silent financial backer was becoming more entrenched rather than more temporary. I was tired of being essential but invisible, necessary but unwanted, family in the bank statements but not in the photographs. I was tired of funding a lifestyle that came with the explicit message that I wasn't good enough to share in the credit for creating it. Most of all, I was tired of loving people who saw me as a resource rather than a person, who valued my contributions but not my presence, who wanted my money but not my image associated with the things that money bought. The folder grew steadily over the months that followed. Bank records, credit card statements, receipts, email confirmations, the financial architecture of the Henderson family's life, documented in detail, the story behind their success, the explanation for their stability, the reason they could afford the lifestyle they'd grown accustomed to. By the time Christmas rolled around, I had a complete picture of exactly how much I'd spent creating and maintaining their happiness, and exactly how little of that happiness I'd been allowed to share. The envelope I handed Lisa that morning contained more than just numbers. It contained the truth about who they really were beneath their perfect family facade, and what would happen when their invisible benefactor decided he was tired of being invisible. But before that moment of revelation, there were months of small humiliations and casual cruelties that helped me understand exactly how my family really saw me. Each incident seemed minor in isolation, but together they painted a clear picture of my actual position in the Henderson family hierarchy. The birthday situation was probably the most telling. Emma's 27th birthday fell on a Saturday in October, perfect timing for a celebration. Lisa planned an elaborate party at their favorite restaurant, the kind of upscale place where appetizers cost more than most people's lunch and the wine list reads like a mortgage payment. I was expected to attend, of course, not just as family, but as the person covering the substantial cost of celebrating Emma's existence in the style she'd grown accustomed to. The reservation was for 12 people, Emma's closest friends, a few family members, and Derek, who was still riding the wave of engagement bliss and expensive tastes. I arrived 15 minutes early, as always, to handle any last-minute issues with payment or seating arrangements. The restaurant was beautiful, the kind of place that made you feel important just by walking through the door. The private dining room Lisa had reserved was perfect, with dramatic lighting and a view of the city skyline that would photograph beautifully. Marcus, Emma greeted me with one of her genuine smiles, the kind that reminded me why I'd always been willing to support her dreams. Thank you so much for making this possible. This place is amazing. Happy birthday, I said, handing her the gift I'd spent weeks selecting, a professional photography portfolio case she'd mentioned wanting, expensive enough to show I cared but practical enough to be useful for her career. You're so thoughtful, she said, giving me a quick hug before being pulled away by arriving friends. The dinner was exactly what you'd expect from a celebration funded by someone else's hard work. Expensive wine flowed freely, appetizers were ordered without regard to cost, and everyone relaxed into the kind of evening that only happens when money isn't a concern. I sat at my usual position at the table, not quite at the periphery, but not in the center of conversation either. Close enough to be included if someone needed something, far enough away to avoid interfering with the main social dynamics. As the evening progressed and the wine loosened tongues, the conversation turned to photography. Emma's friend Sarah, a social media manager who treated Instagram like a professional portfolio, was gushing about the photos she'd taken during her recent vacation. The lighting was perfect, Sarah explained, scrolling through her phone to show examples. But you know what really makes a photo work? Composition. You have to be so careful about who and what you include in the frame. One wrong element can ruin the entire aesthetic. Emma nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly why I'm so picky about the photos I post. Every person, every background element has to contribute to the overall story you're trying to tell. Smart thinking, added Derek. Your Instagram is basically your personal brand now. You can't afford to have anything that doesn't match your image. Lisa, who had been listening while admiring the expensive bracelet I'd given her for her last birthday, joined the conversation. Emma's always been so good at that. Even our family photos, she has such a natural eye for what works and what doesn't. What do you mean? Asked Derek, genuinely curious. Emma laughed, the sound light and casual. Oh, you know how some people just aren't photogenic, like they're perfectly fine in person, but something about cameras just doesn't work for them. My family's learned to be strategic about who gets included in which shots. Sarah nodded knowingly. That's so important for family photos especially. You want them to represent the best version of your family, not just document who happened to be there. Exactly, Lisa agreed. There's a difference between being inclusive and being smart about presentation. Not everyone needs to be in every photo. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the one that accompanied these casual conversations about my photographic inadequacy. Around the table, Emma's friends murmured agreement about the importance of curating your image, completely unaware that they were discussing the systematic exclusion of the person paying for their evening. The conversation moved on to other topics, but the message lingered. I wasn't just excluded from family photos because of space constraints or timing issues. I was excluded because my presence didn't enhance their image. I was the family member they were strategic about, the one who fell into the category of not everyone needs to be in every photo. When the bill arrived, I handled it quietly, as always. $473 for Emma's birthday celebration, not including tip. The cost of funding an evening where my own family casually discussed why I wasn't worth including in their permanent memories. The photos from that night appeared on social media within hours, Emma glowing in the center of every shot, surrounded by friends and family who complimented her image perfectly. I appeared in exactly 0 photos, despite being the reason the celebration was financially possible. But it was the comments that really drove the point home. Such a beautiful family. Emma is so lucky to have such supportive people around her. You can really see the love in these photos. The love was visible, apparently. Just not the love that came in the form of monthly bank transfers and covered expenses. That kind of love was better left out of the frame. The pattern repeated itself at James's birthday 2 months later, then at Lisa's holiday party, then at Emma's art gallery opening that I'd helped fund. Each time, I was essential for making the event possible but unnecessary for documenting it. Each time, the exclusion was presented as consideration for my comfort or awareness of my preferences, rather than judgment about my worth as a family member. The gallery opening was particularly painful. Emma had been working toward her first solo show for 3 years, and when the opportunity finally came, the costs were substantial. Gallery rental, promotional materials, catering for the opening reception, professional photography to document the event. The total came to nearly $12,000, money Emma didn't have but I could provide. "Marcus, this is my dream," she'd said when she asked for help. "This could launch my entire career. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'll pay you back as soon as sales start coming in." I'd never expected repayment for any of my contributions to Emma's career, and this was no different. Seeing her happy and successful was worth more than money, and if I could help make her dreams come true, I was glad to do it. The gallery opening was beautiful. Emma's artwork looked stunning under professional lighting, the catered reception was elegant, and the turnout exceeded expectations. Art collectors, gallery owners, other artists, local media, Emma had managed to attract exactly the kind of crowd that could advance her career. I arrived early to make sure everything was set up properly, then positioned myself near the back of the gallery where I could observe without interfering. Emma was radiant, moving through the crowd with confidence and grace, discussing her work with potential buyers and networking with industry professionals. The professional photographer moved through the space, documenting everything: Emma with her artwork, Emma with potential collectors, Emma with other artists, Emma with family supporters. I watched as James and Lisa posed proudly beside their stepdaughter, beaming with parental pride that would look perfect in promotional materials and social media posts. When the photographer approached me, I assumed he wanted to capture some shots of me with Emma, maybe some candid photos of the family celebrating together. "Excuse me," he said politely. "The artist asked me to let you know that she's focusing on industry connections and collector relationships for tonight's documentation. She'll catch up with you later for some personal photos." Translation: stay out of the professional photos that will be used to promote Emma's career and represent her family support system. I was fine for behind-the-scenes support but not for the public image of her artistic success. I spent the rest of the evening watching Emma's dreams come true, funded by my money but documented without my presence. When she sold 3 paintings that night, generating enough revenue to almost cover half of what I'd spent on the opening, the celebration photos showed her with James and Lisa, toasting her success like proud parents who had sacrificed to make her dreams possible. The irony wasn't lost on me. The 2 people who contributed nothing financially to Emma's success were prominently featured in every photo celebrating that success, while the person who actually made it possible was strategically excluded to maintain the right image. But perhaps the most telling incident happened during Thanksgiving last year. The family had decided to host an elaborate dinner party, inviting extended relatives and family friends for what Lisa called a real traditional celebration. The guest list grew to 22 people, requiring professional catering, additional table rentals, and enough wine to stock a small restaurant. I covered the costs, naturally, nearly $2,000 for a Thanksgiving celebration that would create lasting memories for everyone involved. I also volunteered to help with setup, coordination, and any last-minute needs that arose. The day itself was beautiful. The house looked like something from a magazine spread, with professional floral arrangements, elegant table settings, and enough food to feed twice as many people as were actually attending. Extended family members I rarely saw praised the Henderson family's hospitality and generosity, completely unaware of who was actually paying for their experience. As the afternoon progressed, someone suggested taking a group photo to commemorate the gathering. This seemed like a reasonable request, a large family celebration, everyone dressed nicely, the perfect opportunity to document the occasion. The photographer was Lisa's sister Nancy, an amateur photographer who took pride in her ability to organize group shots. She began arranging people in the living room, positioning everyone according to height, relationship, and what she called visual balance. "Let's get the core family in the center," Nancy directed. "James, Lisa, Emma, Derek. Perfect. Now let's add the grandparents on either side." She continued organizing, creating concentric circles of family members radiating out from the central core. I waited for my turn to be positioned, assuming I'd be placed somewhere near James since I was technically his son. Instead, Nancy continued arranging aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends while I remained standing off to the side. "Nancy," I finally said, "where would you like me to stand?" She looked at me with confusion, as if she'd forgotten I was part of the group. "Oh, Marcus, She glanced around at the carefully arranged family members, clearly trying to figure out where I could fit without disrupting her composition. "Maybe you could take some photos of the group first," Lisa suggested helpfully. "You're so good with cameras, and Nancy could use an assistant." "I'd rather be in the photos," I said quietly. Emma stepped forward with her diplomatic smile. "Of course you'll be in photos, Marcus, but maybe we should get the big family shot first, and then we can do smaller groupings." "This is the family shot," I pointed out. "I am family," An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. 22 people suddenly found themselves witnessing a family dynamic they hadn't expected to see. James cleared his throat. "Son, you know we want you included. Nancy's just trying to organize this efficiently." "Where exactly am I being included?" I asked, looking at the arrangement of people that somehow didn't have space for the person who'd made the gathering financially possible. Nancy, clearly uncomfortable with the tension she'd inadvertently created, tried to salvage the situation. "We could add another row in the back, or maybe, don't worry about it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Take your photos, I'll be in the kitchen if anyone needs anything." I walked away from the group, listening to the resumed chatter as Nancy finished organizing the shot without me. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see the extended family posing together, looking like the picture of multi-generational harmony and success. The photos from that Thanksgiving were beautiful. Professional quality, perfectly composed, capturing exactly the kind of family warmth and togetherness that people frame and display proudly. They told the story of a family that had reason to be grateful, that had built something worth celebrating, that was surrounded by love and support. I wasn't in a single one, but I was in the kitchen, cleaning up the aftermath of their celebration, washing dishes and packing away leftover food that I'd paid for. When relatives commented on what a wonderful host family the Hendersons were, I smiled and said nothing. When they praised James and Lisa for their generosity and hospitality, I nodded appropriately. Nobody asked who had actually funded their wonderful experience. Nobody wondered about the logistics behind such an elaborate celebration. Nobody questioned how a family with inconsistent income could afford to host such an expensive gathering. The visual record showed a successful, generous family surrounded by grateful relatives. The financial record showed a different story entirely, but financial records don't get displayed on mantelpieces or shared on social media. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house had been cleaned, I sat in my apartment, calculating the real cost of Thanksgiving. Not just the money I'd spent, but the price of being systematically erased from the celebration I'd made possible. $2,000 for food and arrangements, 18 years of believing I was part of a family, 8 years of financial support that had created the stability and lifestyle that made such celebrations possible. And in return, I got to be the invisible benefactor, present enough to pay for everything, absent enough to avoid disrupting their image. I started to understand something fundamental about my relationship with the Henderson family. They didn't exclude me from photos because I was unphotogenic. They excluded me because my presence told a story they didn't want to acknowledge, that their success, their stability, their happiness was subsidized by someone they considered embarrassing. Including me in their family photos would have been like including a footnote in a beautiful painting. Technically accurate, but aesthetically disruptive. Better to maintain the illusion of natural family success than to document the complicated reality of financial dependence. But illusions, I was learning, require constant maintenance, and I was getting tired of being the person responsible for maintaining an illusion that systematically excluded me from the benefits. The Christmas Eve incident was what finally pushed me over the edge. Lisa had planned what she called an intimate family celebration for Christmas Eve, just the core family members, she said, a quiet evening to appreciate what really mattered before the larger Christmas Day festivities. I was invited, of course, because intimate family celebration apparently included the person paying for the Christmas gifts everyone would be exchanging. I'd spent nearly $3,000 on presents that year, carefully selecting meaningful gifts that reflected how well I knew each family member's interests and needs. For James, a vintage watch he'd admired in a store window but never bought for himself. For Lisa, a spa weekend package at an exclusive resort she'd been researching. For Emma, professional art supplies and a workshop with a renowned photographer she'd mentioned wanting to study with. For Derek, concert tickets to see his favorite musician, expensive seats that would normally be completely outside his budget. I arrived at the house on Christmas Eve, carrying my contributions to their happiness, looking forward to a quiet evening of family connection. The house was beautiful, decorated with the kind of professional holiday display that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The tree was perfect, surrounded by elegantly wrapped gifts that would be opened the following morning. Lisa greeted me at the door wearing the diamond earrings I'd given her for her birthday, sparkling under the chandelier I'd helped them buy when they refinanced the house. "Marcus, darling, perfect timing," she said, taking the gift bags from my hands. "We were just about to take some Christmas Eve photos by the tree, family tradition, you know." I knew the tradition. I'd been excluded from it for the past 3 years running, but I knew it existed. Emma appeared in a red dress that photographed beautifully, Derek beside her in a sweater that somehow looked both casual and expensive. James emerged from his study wearing the watch I'd bought him, though I doubted he'd made the connection. "Should we get started?" Emma asked, already positioning herself near the tree. "The lighting is perfect right now." Lisa began arranging everyone in what had become their standard formation. James in the center, dignified and paternal. Lisa beside him, elegant and warm. Emma and Derek positioned to suggest both family connection and independent success. The composition was practiced, refined by years of exclusion to focus on exactly the family members who enhanced their desired image. I waited to see where I would fit into this year's arrangement, hoping that maybe the Christmas spirit had softened their usual aesthetic concerns. "Marcus, sweetie," Lisa said in her most diplomatic tone, "would you mind taking the photos this year? You have such a good eye, and it would mean so much to have." I stood there for a moment, processing what she was asking. Not just exclusion from the photos but active participation in documenting my own erasure. She wanted me to position myself behind the camera, creating permanent records of the family I financially supported but wasn't considered attractive enough to include. "I'd rather be in the photos," I said simply. Emma's smile flickered slightly. "Marcus, you know how you feel about being photographed, plus, this way you get to make sure we get the perfect shots." "I feel fine about being photographed," I said. "I feel bad about being excluded from family photos." James stepped forward with his reasonable, "let's solve this problem" expression. "Son, nobody's being excluded, we're just trying to get a few good shots for the Christmas cards. You know how Lisa's friends expect certain kinds of Lisa's friends, the people whose opinions mattered more than including the person who made their Christmas celebration financially possible. What if we took some with me in them?" I suggested, "and some without?" Lisa exchanged a glance with Emma, one of those wordless communications that happen between people who spend a lot of time coordinating their approach to managing difficult situations. "Of course we can do that," Lisa said brightly, "after we get the card photos done. Those have to be just right, you understand." I understood perfectly. The Christmas card photos, the ones that would be printed and mailed to everyone they wanted to impress, needed to exclude me. The throwaway shots that nobody would see could include the family embarrassment, but only after the important documentation was complete. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded, "I think I'll pass on photos this year." The room went quiet. Even Derek, who usually tried to stay out of family dynamics, looked uncomfortable. "Marcus," James said in his most paternal tone, "don't be dramatic, we're just trying to get organized here." "I'm not being dramatic," I replied. "I'm just tired of funding family celebrations that I'm too embarrassing to be included in." Emma's face flushed. "Nobody said you were embarrassed." "Oh, you didn't have to say it," I said quietly. "You've been showing it for years." I left that night without participating in their Christmas Eve tradition, either as photographer or subject. I drove home through neighborhoods, decorated with lights that twinkled like the jewelry I'd bought but would never be credited for, past houses where families were probably taking their own Christmas photos, families that found ways to include everyone who mattered to them. That night I made a decision that had been building for months. I opened my laptop and created a new document, a comprehensive record of my financial contributions to the Henderson family over the past 8 years. Every payment, every gift, every covered expense, documented with dates and amounts and explanations. The numbers were staggering even to me, nearly $400,000 in direct financial support. Mortgage payments, car repairs, medical bills, educational expenses, vacation costs, daily living expenses, entertainment, gifts, emergencies, and celebrations. I had essentially funded an upper-middle-class lifestyle for 4 people while being treated as too socially inadequate to appear in their Christmas card photos. But the document wasn't just about money, it was about what money represented. Every payment was a gesture of love, support, family commitment. Every covered expense was me saying, "Your happiness matters to me, your dreams are worth investing in, your problems are my problems because we're family." And in return, I got to be the family member they strategically excluded from the visual record of the happiness I'd made possible. The Christmas morning photos appeared on social media the next day, exactly as expected. The Henderson family looking perfect under their expensive tree, surrounded by expensive gifts, in their expensively decorated home. The picture of family success and harmony and traditional values. The comments were everything Lisa had hoped for. "What a beautiful family. You can see how much love there is. Such a perfect Christmas scene." Nobody asked who had funded the perfection. Nobody wondered about the source of their obvious prosperity. Nobody noticed that the financial foundation of their success was invisible in the frame, but I noticed, and for the first time in 8 years, I started wondering what would happen if that financial foundation was removed. What would their perfect family photos look like if they had to fund their own lifestyle? What kind of Christmas celebrations would they have if they couldn't depend on Marcus the invisible ATM to make their dreams affordable? What would happen if the person they considered too embarrassing to photograph decided he was too embarrassed by them to continue paying? The folder I'd been building grew thicker as I added the Christmas documentation, bank transfers for gifts, receipts for decorations, payment confirmations for the photographer they'd used for family photos that didn't include the person who'd made them financially possible. By New Year's Eve, I had everything I needed to answer the question that had been haunting me for months: what was my relationship with this family actually worth? The answer, as it turned out, was in the numbers, and the numbers told a very different story than the one captured in their carefully curated photographs. The turning point came in February when I discovered they were planning Emma's wedding without consulting me about the budget. I found out by accident, overhearing a phone conversation between Lisa and the wedding planner while I was dropping off money for the monthly mortgage payment. The Henderson family is very particular about their image, Lisa was saying. We need everything to be absolutely perfect. Cost isn't really a concern since we have such strong financial backing. Such strong financial backing. That was me, reduced to an anonymous financial resource, not Emma's brother, not James's son, just backing. I stood in the hallway listening as Lisa discussed flowers that cost more than my car payment, a venue that required a down payment equivalent to 3 months of my salary, and catering that would feed 200 people at prices that made my consulting rates look modest. What about photography? The wedding planner asked. Oh, that's crucial, Lisa replied. Emma's very specific about how she wants to be presented. We'll need someone who understands elegant family portraiture. This needs to be absolutely beautiful. Elegant family portraiture. I could already see myself being positioned behind a potted plant, or asked to help with crowd control while they captured Emma's perfect family moment. That evening, I sat Emma down for what I thought would be a straightforward conversation about her wedding plans. I heard you talking to a wedding planner today, I said. Emma's face lit. Oh Marcus, I was going to tell you about that. We found the most amazing venue, and the photographer's portfolio is just stunning. This is going to be everything I've dreamed of. What's the budget looking like? She waved her hand dismissively. Don't worry about the details. Lisa's handling all the financial coordination. You just need to be there to celebrate with us. Emma, I'm the one paying for this wedding. I think I should know what I'm paying for. Her smile faltered slightly. Of course you're involved in the planning. We just didn't want to burden you with all the vendor management stuff. You're already doing so much. How much is so much exactly? She looked uncomfortable. I don't have the exact numbers memorized, but Lisa said you were comfortable with the range we discussed. We never discussed a range. Nobody's talked to me about budget, timeline or expectations. Marcus, you're being parallel. Of course we want your input, but you know how you get about social events. We figured you'd prefer us to handle the coordination while you focus on the financial support. How I get about social events, meaning awkward, antisocial, better kept in the background where I couldn't interfere with their elegant family portraiture. I want to be involved in the planning, I said, and I want to understand exactly what role I'm expected to play in the actual wedding. Emma's discomfort was visible now. What do you mean, what role? Am I in the wedding party? Am I walking you down the aisle? Am I giving a speech? Am I in the family photos? She was quiet for a long moment. Marcus, you know how important this day is to me. Everything has to be perfect. That's not an answer. Derek's father is walking me down the aisle. His family has very traditional expectations, and it would be weird to have multiple father figures involved. Derek's father, who'd met Emma exactly 4 times and contributed exactly $0 to her life, would be walking her down the aisle instead of the person who'd been supporting her dreams for 8 years. What about the photos? Another pause. We'll definitely get some casual shots with everyone, but the formal photos need to work for the wedding album, and Derek's family is very image conscious. They're expecting a certain kind of presentation. There it was again. The certain kind of presentation that never seemed to include me. Emma, I've spent over $50,000 supporting your life and career over the past 5 years. I've paid for your rent, your art supplies, your shows, your travel, your emergencies. I've covered your credit cards and student loans and insurance payments, and you're telling me I'm not the right kind of family for your wedding photos. She looked stricken. It's not about what kind of family you are. It's about what looks natural in pictures. Derek's family expects traditional family dynamics, and having too many people in the formal shots makes them look cluttered. Too many people, I'm too many people, that's not what I meant. What did you mean? She struggled for words. I meant that wedding photos are supposed to look timeless and elegant, and sometimes including everyone makes them look more like group snapshots than professional portraits. Professional portraits, elegant presentations, timeless aesthetic, all code for the same thing. Marcus doesn't belong in the visual record of the family he's financially sustaining. What if I stop paying for everything? I asked quietly. Emma's face went white. What do you mean? What if I decided that I'm tired of funding a family that considers me too embarrassing to photograph? What would happen to your perfect wedding then? Marcus, you're being dramatic. Nobody thinks you're embarrassing. Then why am I never in any photos? You are in photos. Lots of photos. Show me. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her camera roll with increasing desperation. After several minutes of searching, she found 3 pictures that included me. All casual background shots where I was barely visible. See, you're in photos. Those aren't family photos, Emma. Those are pictures I accidentally appeared in. She put her phone away, her expression shifting from defensive to frustrated. What do you want from us, Marcus? We include you in everything. You're at every dinner, every celebration, every important moment. I want to be in the pictures that document those moments. Why is this so important to you? They're just photos. Just photos. To Emma, the visual record of our family was just photos. But to me, those photos represented everything I'd never been allowed to have despite earning it over and over again. They were proof of belonging, evidence of love, documentation that I mattered to the people I'd spent years supporting. Because those photos are how you tell the story of your life, I said. And I've been edited out of your story even though I've been funding it. Emma was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I'll talk to Derek about including you in more of the formal shots. You'll talk to Derek? Talk. About whether your brother gets to be in your wedding photos. His family has very specific traditions about wedding photography. I have to consider their feelings too. What about my feelings? Of course your feelings matter. But this is my wedding day, Marcus. Everything has to be perfect. Perfect. The word that had defined my exclusion from this family for years. Their perfect life funded by my imperfect presence and maintained by my invisible support. That night I made a decision that had been building for months. I called Kevin, the same photographer who'd been hired for the Christmas card session, and asked about his availability for Emma's wedding. Oh, you're with the Henderson family, he said. Yes, I'm doing Emma's wedding photography. Beautiful event from what I understand. Very elegant. What have they told you about family photo requirements? The usual wedding shot list. Bride with parents, groom with parents, combined families, wedding party groupings. Pretty standard stuff. Am I on the shot list? There was a pause. Let me check my notes. Another pause. I have James Henderson as father of the bride, Lisa Henderson as stepmother, Derek's parents, and the wedding party. Is there someone specific you're looking for? I'm Marcus Henderson, James's son. Oh, Kevin sounded genuinely surprised. I don't think I have you listed for any of the formal family shots, just some general reception photos. But that must be an oversight. Let me follow up with Lisa about the complete family photo requirements. Don't, I said quickly. I just wanted to understand the plan. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall where other people might have family photos displayed. My walls were bare except for a few generic art pieces. Nothing personal, nothing that showed connections or relationships or evidence that I mattered to anyone. I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet I'd been maintaining, the one that documented every dollar I'd contributed to the Henderson family over the past 8 years. The number at the bottom was approaching $500,000. $500,000 in support for people who couldn't find space for me in their family photos. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about what the money represented and what I'd gotten in return. I'd bought them a lifestyle they couldn't afford, funded dreams they couldn't achieve on their own, and solved problems they couldn't handle independently. And my reward was systematic exclusion from the visual evidence of their success. I started a new document, this one titled simply Terms. If I was going to continue supporting this family financially, there needed to be clear expectations about what I received in return. Not just gratitude, not just inclusion in events I was funding, but actual recognition as a valued family member. The first term was simple, equal inclusion in all family photos, formal and casual. The second, acknowledgement of my contributions when others praised the family's generosity or success. The third, consultation on any expenses over $1,000 that I would be expected to cover. The fourth, respect for my role as an equal family member, not just a financial resource. The fifth, honest communication about expectations rather than manipulation disguised as consideration. I stared at the document for hours, refining the language and considering the implications. These weren't unreasonable demands. They were basic requirements for being treated like family instead of like a silent partner in someone else's life. The next morning I called James and asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss Emma's wedding planning. He sounded pleased that I wanted to be more involved, completely unaware that my involvement was about to change dramatically. We met at his favorite cafe, the expensive one where coffee cost more than most people's lunch. James ordered his usual complicated drink while I stuck with regular coffee, a small rebellion against the culture of unnecessary luxury I'd been subsidizing for years. "So Emma tells me you want to be more involved in the wedding planning," James said, settling into his chair with the satisfied expression of a man whose problems were always solved by someone else's money. "I want to understand my role in the wedding," I said, "both financially and personally." "Well, financially you're being incredibly generous as always. Emma's so grateful for your support. And personally, you're her brother. Of course you'll be there celebrating with us." "Will I be in the family photos?" James looked surprised by the directness of the question. "Of course you'll be in photos. Why would you ask that?" "Because I haven't been in any meaningful family photos for the past several years despite funding most of the events being photographed." "Marcus, that's not true. You're in lots of photos. Show me." James pulled out his phone as Emma had done and began scrolling. The search took longer than he expected, and his expression grew increasingly uncomfortable as he failed to find examples of me in any significant family photos. "Well," he said finally, "maybe we haven't been as thoughtful about that as we should have been. But wedding photos are different. Those are permanent Exactly. Which is why I need to know whether I'm considered worth preserving in those permanent memories." James set down his coffee cup. "Son, what's really going on here? You seem upset about something more than just photos." "I'm tired of being treated like a financial resource instead of a family member. That's not how we treat you. Last week Lisa described me to the wedding planner as strong financial backing, not as Emma's brother or your son. As backing." James had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Lisa sometimes expresses things in business terms. She didn't mean anything personal by it." "Everything about this is personal, James. I've been supporting this family for 8 years, and I'm tired of being invisible in the story you tell about yourselves." "You're not invisible. You're crucial to our family. Crucial but not photogenic. Essential but embarrassing. Important enough to pay for everything, not important enough to be credited with anything." James was quiet for a long time. "What do you want from us, Marcus?" I pulled out the document I'd prepared and slid it across the table. "I want to be treated like family instead of like a sponsor." He read through the terms slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to concern to something that might have been anger. "This feels like an ultimatum," he said finally. "It's a clarification of expectations. You're threatening to stop supporting us if we don't meet your demands. I'm explaining what I need to continue supporting you. There's a difference." James pushed the document back across the table. "Marcus, this isn't how family relationships work. You can't negotiate love and belonging." "You're right," I said. "But you've been negotiating my exclusion for years. Every time you position me out of photos, every time you describe me as financial backing instead of family, every time you ask Derek's father to walk Emma down the aisle instead of the person who's actually supported her dreams. You've been negotiating my role in this family, and you've consistently negotiated me down to the position of invisible patron. That's not what we've been doing." "Then what have you been doing?" James struggled with the question. "We've been trying to balance everyone's needs and comfort levels. Whose comfort level requires me to be absent from family photos?" He didn't have an answer for that. I left the document on the table and stood up. "Think about it, James. Emma's wedding is in 4 months. The photography deposit alone is $8,000. I can cover it, or I can let you figure out how to afford your elegant family portraiture without strong financial backing. Walking away from that conversation felt like stepping off a cliff. For 8 years I'd maintained the fiction that my financial contributions were temporary, that my exclusion from family photos was coincidental, that my treatment as a resource rather than a relative was some kind of misunderstanding. But the document I'd left on that table made everything explicit. Either they valued me enough to include me as an equal family member, or they could fund their perfect image without my help. I spent the next 3 days waiting for someone to call, to acknowledge the legitimacy of my concerns, to suggest we could work together to solve the problem I'd identified. Nobody called. On the 4th day Emma showed up at my apartment, tears in her eyes and desperation in her voice. "Marcus, please don't do this to me," she said before I'd even invited her inside. "Don't ruin my wedding because you're upset about photos." "I'm not ruining anything, Emma. I'm just clarifying what I'm willing to pay for." "Dad said you gave him some kind of contract." "I gave him a list of basic expectations for being treated like family instead of like a silent investor. But threatening to pull funding for my wedding, that's cruel, Marcus." I looked at her standing in my doorway, beautiful and distressed, exactly the kind of family member who photographed well and deserved to have her dreams come true. I'd always been willing to sacrifice for Emma's happiness, to cover her expenses and support her goals even when she didn't acknowledge the source of that support. "Emma, I've spent over $50,000 on your life in the past 5 years. I've covered your rent, your art supplies, your shows, your emergencies, your credit cards, your insurance. I've funded your engagement party, and now I'm expected to fund your wedding. And in return you've systematically excluded me from every meaningful photo documenting the life I've made possible for you." "We haven't excluded you. Derek's father is walking you down the aisle. That's because Derek's family has traditional expectations. I'm not in the formal wedding photos. That's because too many people make the shots look cluttered. I'm not considered immediate family for photography purposes. That's because wedding photos need to look elegant." I stepped back and looked at her, this person I'd loved and supported and enabled for years, and I realized something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of having the same conversation, tired of accepting the same excuses, tired of funding a family that considered me too awkward for their aesthetic. "Emma," I said quietly, "I love you, but I can't keep paying to be treated as less than family." "You're not less than family." "Then act like it." Up next you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.